The War in the Pacific. It was ugly over there too. Americans had been captured in the Philippines in 1942, forced to surrender. And this is going to be when MacArthur is going to make his famous "I shall return" speech as he leaves the Philippines. But those soldiers who were captured are going to be put on a 60-mile march through the jungle, and it's known as the Bataan Death March. Along this march, 5,000 Americans are going to die. Dehydration, starvation, exposure. They were shot, they were tortured. Some were even beheaded in this march, and their bodies were just left there to rot. It wasn't like, they carried them off, and these troops were marched through the jungle to a prisoner of war camp, and they're going to be held there for a while. Like I said, MacArthur is going to, he is going to be the commander of the Philippines, but he's going to make the escape before the Japanese take control. He gives his famous speech, says, "I promise I will return." He does eventually return, but by this point, it's pretty much all said and done. But he is the commanding general of the Pacific Army, along with Admiral Nimitz, who commanded the Pacific Fleet. And they're going to institute a system called island hopping. And island hopping is this idea that the American Navy and the American troops are going to hop across islands in the Pacific, making their way towards Japan. And, over time, they're going to take island after island after island, including the Philippines, Guam, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa are just several of the islands they're going to take. Battle of Midway is going to be a major turning point in the war in the Pacific due to the fact that we have a new machine, a new decoder, the Enigma, and it has the ability to decode Japanese codes and secret Japanese messages. So we are going to be aware of the Battle of Midway, and that's going to allow Admiral Nimitz to prepare. And during that battle, we are going to sink 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. And I think they only had 6 in their fleet. So losing 4 of them was a major loss to the Japanese. And you're going to see them start to change their fighting style a little bit after that. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But let me just say the word to you, kamikazes. But I'll get back to that. Iwo Jima, I want to touch on that. This was an island of little or no value to us. It does have an airstrip on it. But this is where the famous photo of the American flag raising is going to be taking place on Mount Surbiachi. And that was February of 1945. And this picture is going to become famous, and it will actually become the national monument to the Marine Corps. So if you want an interesting movie, you can watch Flags of Our Fathers. Follows the men who survived, because 3 of the men who helped raise the flag did not survive the battle. But the ones who returned, what they dealt with, what they lived with coming back to the United States after the war. It's called Flag of Our Fathers. It's a good one. All right, Potsdam Conference, very similar to Yalta. Now we're going to determine what happens to Japan after the war. This is in July, going into early August of 1945. And notice in this picture, you have Churchill, now President Harry Truman, and Joseph Stalin, again discussing what's going to happen in the Pacific. But what's very interesting is in the middle of this conference, the players change. Please notice to the right of Harry Truman, that is no longer Winston Churchill. Great Britain actually voted Churchill out of office in the middle of this war, or actually the middle of the American War in the Pacific, but at the end of the war in Europe. The reason why they voted him out was because they were afraid they were going to get into another world war, because they did think that Churchill was going to go after Stalin. So they voted him out and brought in David Attlee. And that's David Attlee there on the far left. Now at the Potsdam Conference, something very major happened. A note was delivered to Harry Truman. And the note simply says, "The baby has been delivered." And the baby that note was talking about is going to be the atomic bomb. And he had just gotten word that the Trinity test, the test for the atomic bomb, had been successful. And the United States now has a weapon of mass destruction. Now, we had to determine whether or not to use it. And there was questions on, this is going to have a devastating, the casualty numbers for using the atomic bomb would be huge. But then they had to look at what would the casualty rates be should the United States invade Japan. And we would have to do it with the help of the Soviet Union. And Stalin has made it clear that he wants Japan once we win and all this other stuff. The estimates said that should a land battle take place on the island of Japan, not only would over 1 million Allied troops become casualties, but over 1 million Japanese citizens probably would be casualties of that war as well. And then, like I said, the Japanese are now using a different form of war, and that is the use of kamikazes. Kamikazes were suicide pilots. They would basically fly their planes and use their planes as bombs, and they would just fly them into ships, they'd fly them into the ground, wherever they had to. And so we determined that there would actually save lives if we use the atomic bomb. But before we did that, we notified Japan. We said, listen, we have this bomb. We're prepared to use it. If you surrender now, we won't use it. Well, Japan is going to say no. And so what we're going to do is we're going to determine that we are going to use the bomb. We're going to load the first one, Little Boy, onto the Enola Gay. And on April 6th, 1945, we are going to drop the first nuclear weapon in U.S. history, and we're going to drop that on Hiroshima. The effects, the immediate effects, are going to be 80,000 people killed instantly. Thousands are going to die later from radiation poisoning. And then the long-term medical effects are also going to have, play a huge role in the Japanese lives for generations to come. Following dropping the bomb on Hiroshima, we're going to once again contact the Japanese emperor and say, all right, we got another one. Go ahead and surrender now. And they refuse to surrender. So the next, on August 8th, August 8th, we are going to drop the bomb on Nagasaki. And same type of devastation. That bomb's nickname was Fat Man. So the two bombs are Fat Man and Little Boy. After that, after the devastation that's incurred by 2 atomic bombs being dropped, we are the only country in world history to use nuclear weapons, the only one. And hopefully that will always stay that way. But after that happens, and we see the devastation that comes from that, we are going to finally see Japan surrendering to the United States. VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day, September 2nd, 1945. World War II is officially over. Fallout from World War II, we're going to have things like the Nuremberg Trials, which is going to try Nazi war criminals for what they did during the Holocaust with the concentration camps. These men are going to be found guilty. There's 2 of them right now, Hermann Goering and Rudolf Hess. Other men are sitting next to them, all of them on trial. They will be found guilty and sentenced to death. However, somehow they got some cyanide pills, and prior to their actual execution, they are actually going to commit suicide. But the Nuremberg trials are going to be in place to try to bring retribution for those atrocities that the Germans instituted during the war in Europe. We're also going to see the formation of the United Nations. Now, the United Nations is going to be created a little bit differently than the League of Nations. We're going to have a Security Council. And on that Security Council, you're going to have the Big Five. All 5 allied powers, the United States, China, Russia, Britain, and France. And each one of those countries has veto power on the Security Council. So any decision the Security Council makes, and the Security Council deals with relationships between countries in the world, deals with aggressive actions that countries take and the response of the UN and stuff like that. The Big Five, each one of them individually have the power to veto any decision made by the Security Council. They don't have to give a reason why or anything like that. They can just say, nope, veto. And so that's going to make it a lot different than the League of Nations, where basically with the United Nations, you have a governing authority. You have an authority that can make these decisions, where the League of Nations, you really didn't have anybody in charge. All right, so 44 months that the United States fought in this war. And on average, based on our casualty rates, that would be 350 US soldiers that died every single day during the war. And the question you have to kind of ask yourself, and I don't expect an answer, but do you think the American people would have been able to fight this war, or, had they known what that statistic would be? Would you have seen, obviously, the enlistment, the support from the American people for this war, had we known how many men we were going to lose? That's over, 600,000 men, so maybe 500,000, closer to 500,000 men that are going to die in this war. But we do win. Europe is going to be liberated from German control. A lot of China is going to be liberated from Japanese control. America has a new, powerful position in this world. And we're going to see, though, as we move forward, a lot of decisions that were made during World War II are actually going to lead to more conflict down the road. So some of the things that we had to deal with in this war, we just kind of kicked the can down the road. And we're going to see that, World War II and, what we went through is going to have a long lasting effect in our country. About 40 years, like I said earlier, with the Cold War. So that's it. That's World War II. I hope you guys got something out of it. Again, if you have any questions, you can always contact me. Just email me. But other than that, we will see you the next time around. Boom, Lennox out.